Johnny Carson was wrapping up his interview with the Omaha Children's Choir when a small voice from the front row called out, "Mr. Carson, can I please touch your face? I want to know what funny looks like." The Tonight Show studio fell completely silent as 7-year-old Amy Patterson, blind since birth, stood clutching her white cane just 3 feet from America's most untouchable television star. But when Johnny Carson dropped to his knees and guided her tiny hands to his tear-streaked face, 20 million viewers witnessed something that would forever change how we understand human connection. The night Johnny Carson let a blind child see his soul, April 14, 1976. The Tonight Show was gliding through its 11:48 p.m. segment with the ethereal charm that made Thursday nights special for NBC's programming. Johnny Carson had just completed a delightful interview with the Omaha Children's Choir, 23 children between ages 6 and 14 who'd won a national competition to perform on The Tonight Show. They'd just finished singing Tomorrow from Annie, their young voices filling Studio One with a purity that had moved even the typically stoic camera operators to applause. Johnny wore his favorite dove gray suit with the subtle blue pinstripe, the one his mother had sent him for Christmas, paired with a lavender tie that the wardrobe department said brought out his warmth. The children sat in 3 neat rows on special risers that the Tonight Show crew had positioned where the musical guests usually performed, their matching navy blazers and white shirts creating a visual harmony that played beautifully on camera. Their director, Mrs. Eleanor Hutchison, stood to the side beaming with pride as Johnny praised their performance. The audience of 300 was particularly responsive that night, filled with parents, grandparents, and teachers who traveled from Nebraska to watch these children perform on national television. The energy was different from typical Tonight Shows, softer, more familial, with an innocence that reminded everyone why they'd fallen in love with television in the first place. Ed McMahon had been especially animated during the children's performance, his usual hi-yo replaced with genuine grandfatherly delight. Doc Severinsen and the band had accompanied the children with unusual gentleness, dialing back their typical brass power to support rather than overwhelm the young voices. The show was running slightly long, but Fred DeCordova hadn't signaled for cuts. Some moments were worth breaking format for, and this was one of them. Johnny was preparing to thank the choir one final time before commercial, his cards ready with the setup for his next segment about President Ford's latest gaffe. The studio lights were particularly warm that night, casting an almost golden glow over the children's faces. Everything about this moment suggested another heartwarming but routine segment in the Tonight Show's vast archive, the kind that would be remembered fondly, but not historically. The voice that changed everything came at exactly 11:49 p.m., just as Johnny was thanking Mrs. Hutchison for bringing the choir to The Tonight Show. It was small, crystalline, and carried with perfect clarity through the studio's acoustics. "Mr. Carson, can I please touch your face? I want to know what funny looks like." The question came from the front row of the choir risers, from a little girl who hadn't sung with the others but had sat perfectly still throughout the performance. Amy Patterson, 7 years old, stood up slowly, her white cane unfolding in her small hand with practiced precision, her unseeing eyes turned approximately toward where Johnny's voice had been coming from. The Tonight Show studio experienced a collective intake of breath. 300 audience members froze mid-applause. The other children in the choir turned to look at Amy with expressions mixing surprise and protectiveness. Mrs. Hutchison started to move toward Amy, her face showing mortification at this breach of television protocol, her hand reaching out to guide the child back to her seat. But Amy took another step forward, her cane tapping once against the riser's edge, the sound amplified by the overhead boom microphones into something that seemed to stop time itself in Studio One. Johnny Carson's reaction happened in layers visible to the cameras. First confusion, processing what had been asked. Then recognition, understanding that the child was blind. Then something deeper, a flash of emotion that flickered across his features before he could control it. His hands, which had been holding his interview cards, slowly lowered to his sides, the cards falling forgotten onto the Tonight Show's carpeted stage. Ed McMahon half rose from his chair, uncertain whether to intervene. Doc Severinsen stood frozen with his trumpet still in hand. The NBC cameras, typically in constant smooth motion, stopped their movement as their operators waited to see what Johnny would do. Amy took another step forward, now at the edge of the riser platform, just 3 feet from where Johnny stood at center stage. "My mama says you make her laugh every night," Amy continued, her voice carrying that fearless honesty unique to children. "I hear you on TV, but I want to know what your face feels like when you're being funny. Please, Mr. Carson." Johnny Carson dropped to his knees on the Tonight Show stage without hesitation, bringing himself to Amy Patterson's height. The movement was so unexpected, so immediate, that the cameras almost missed it. The king of late night literally lowering himself to a child's level on live television. "Amy," Johnny said softly, his voice different from any tone America had heard from him in 14 years of hosting. "Come here, sweetheart." He held out his hands, and Amy's choir teacher started to protest, but Johnny silenced her with a gentle look that said, "This is happening." Amy navigated the 3 feet between them with her cane, her small face tilted upward, following Johnny's voice like a sunflower finding light. When she reached him, Johnny gently took her free hand and placed it on his cheek. "This is my regular face," he said quietly, though the boom microphones picked up every word. "Now I'm going to smile." He smiled, and Amy's fingers traced the movement of his muscles, feeling the way his face changed. "Now I'm going to make my funny face," Johnny said, and he made an exaggerated expression that the audience couldn't see, but Amy could feel, her fingers reading the geography of comedy on his skin. "Your face gets warm when you're funny," Amy observed, her small fingers moving across Johnny's features with the delicate precision of someone reading Braille. "And your eyes, they crinkle up right here." She touched the corners of his eyes where crow's feet formed. "My daddy has those same wrinkles. Mama calls them laugh lines." The studio was so quiet that Amy's words seemed to float in the air. Then she found the tears that had started rolling down Johnny's cheeks. "Why are you crying, Mr. Carson? Did I make you sad?" Johnny's voice broke completely when he answered. "No, Amy. Sometimes grown-ups cry when something is too beautiful for words." He guided her other hand to his face so she could feel his full expression. "You wanted to know what funny looks like, but you're teaching me what brave looks like." Amy's response destroyed whatever composure remained in Studio One. "I'm not brave, Mr. Carson. I just wanted to see you the only way I can." Johnny Carson remained on his knees, holding Amy Patterson's hands against his face as she continued her exploration. "Amy," he said, his voice steady despite the tears, "would you like to feel what Ed McMahon looks like? He's even funnier than me." Without waiting for network approval or considering protocol, Johnny gestured to Ed, who immediately left his desk and knelt beside them. Amy's hands moved to Ed's face, feeling his broader features, his nervous smile. "You're bigger," Amy announced, causing the first gentle laugh to ripple through the emotional studio. "And your mustache tickles." "Now, Doc," Johnny called to Severinsen, who was already moving toward them with his trumpet. Within moments, the entire Tonight Show orchestra was kneeling in a circle around Amy, letting her touch their faces, their instruments, creating a moment of collective intimacy never before seen on television. Amy's fingers danced across Doc's face, feeling his famous loud outfit through texture. "Your jacket feels like music," she said, running her hands over the sequins. The camera operators abandoned their positions to capture this unprecedented scene. The Tonight Show transformed into something beyond entertainment. Johnny then did something that broke every rule of television staging. He stood up and announced to the audience, "Anyone who wants to meet Amy, come down here, right now." The NBC executives in the control booth were frantically signaling, but Johnny wasn't looking at them. 300 audience members began moving toward the stage, creating a gentle crowd around the little girl. Parents lifted their children to meet her. Elderly people waited patiently for their turn to take her hand. Amy stood at the center of it all, her face radiant with joy, touching face after face, seeing the entire audience in her unique way. Mrs. Hutchison, Amy's choir director, was crying openly as she watched her student become the center of the Tonight Show's most human moment. Johnny stayed right beside Amy, introducing each person. "This is Mrs. Rodriguez from New Mexico. She has the biggest smile. This is Tom from Portland. He has a beard like Santa Claus." For 15 minutes, an eternity in television time, The Tonight Show became Amy's window into a world of faces she'd never seen but would never forget. When order finally returned to The Tonight Show, after 17 minutes of unscripted magic, Amy Patterson was sitting on Johnny Carson's lap at his famous desk, her small hands exploring the surface where countless celebrities had sat. The audience had returned to their seats, but the atmosphere in Studio One had fundamentally changed. 300 strangers had become a community bonded by witnessing pure human connection. Johnny held Amy carefully, like precious crystal, while she ran her fingers over his desk microphone, his coffee mug with the Tonight Show logo, the pencils he used to drum during commercial breaks. NBC's switchboard exploded with 31,000 calls within minutes. Not complaints about the schedule disruption, but viewers sobbing their gratitude for what they'd witnessed. Parents of blind children called offering to fly Amy to their cities. Ophthalmologists called offering free consultations. Teachers called asking for footage to show their students. The network executives, who'd initially panicked at Johnny abandoning format, watched the ratings spike to the highest levels of 1976. America hadn't just been watching television. They'd been witnessing a transformation of what television could be. Johnny asked Amy what she wanted to be when she grew up. "A teacher," she said without hesitation, "so I can help other kids see things in different ways." Johnny's response came without his usual polish. "Amy, you've already taught 30 million people tonight. You've taught us that seeing isn't about eyes. It's about courage to reach out and connect." He then made an announcement that NBC's legal department would scramble to formalize. "Amy, The Tonight Show is going to pay for your entire education, from now through college, whatever you need to become that teacher." The show had run 23 minutes over schedule, obliterating the late local news, but no affiliate complained. As Johnny carried Amy back to the choir risers, she'd fallen asleep in his arms. The cameras captured an image that would win an Emmy. Johnny Carson, tears dried on his face, holding a sleeping blind child, while 22 other children surrounded them protectively. Mrs. Hutchison mouthed thank you to Johnny, who responded with words picked up by his lapel mic. "No, Eleanor. Thank her. She just reminded me why I do this." The Amy Patterson moment triggered a nationwide examination of accessibility and inclusion that nobody had anticipated. Within 3 months, The Tonight Show became the first television program to offer audio description services for blind viewers, with Johnny personally funding the initiative. NBC received over 200,000 letters from families with disabled children, sharing how Amy's courage had inspired their own children to engage more boldly with the world. The American Foundation for the Blind reported a 400% increase in volunteer applications, with many citing the Amy Patterson episode as their motivation to help blind children experience the world through touch and description. Amy became an unexpected regular on The Tonight Show, returning every 6 months to see new guests with her hands. Bob Hope let her feel his famous ski nose profile. Frank Sinatra guided her fingers across his face while singing softly just for her. Muhammad Ali shadow boxed slowly so she could feel the air movement. Each appearance generated millions in donations to blind children's charities, though Johnny insisted all attention focus on Amy, not the fundraising. The segments became so beloved that guests began requesting to appear specifically when Amy was scheduled, considering it an honor to be seen by her. Educational institutions revolutionized their approach to sensory learning after studying the broadcast. The Patterson method, using touch and description to create mental images, became standard practice in schools for the blind. Child psychologists noted that sighted children who watched Amy's appearances showed increased empathy and understanding toward disabled peers. Teachers reported dramatic decreases in bullying of disabled students, with children often saying, "Remember how Amy saw Johnny Carson? That's how we should see each other." Johnny quietly established the Amy Patterson Foundation for Sensory Learning, funding programs that brought blind children to television studios, theaters, and museums nationwide for tactile experiences. By 1980, over 10,000 blind children had participated in seeing sessions inspired by Amy's original request. Mrs. Hutchison, Amy's choir director, became the foundation's first director, working with Johnny to ensure every blind child who wanted to see something special could. The foundation's motto, chosen by Amy herself, was simple. Seeing is feeling with your heart. The Amy Patterson encounter stripped away 30 years of carefully constructed barriers between Johnny Carson and physical intimacy with strangers. His 3 ex-wives would later reveal in separate interviews that Johnny had always been uncomfortable with touch, maintaining physical distance even in private moments. He'd shake hands at arm's length, his second wife Joanne recalled. But watching him with Amy, letting her explore his face while he cried, that was a different man. Or maybe it was the real man finally emerging. The revelation that Johnny Carson, master of controlled distances, had allowed a blind child to map his vulnerabilities with her fingers, redefined public understanding of his emotional architecture. Staff members at The Tonight Show began noticing immediate changes in Johnny's behavior after Amy. He started hugging guests instead of just shaking hands. He'd walk into the audience during commercial breaks, something he'd never done in 14 years. Makeup artist Patricia Melton observed, "Before Amy, Johnny would sit rigid while I worked, eyes closed, completely withdrawn. After Amy, he'd ask about my kids, touch my hand to thank me. It was like Amy's fingers had awakened something in him about human connection through touch." The physical barrier that had defined Johnny's professional presence, always behind the desk, always at safe distance, began dissolving. The most profound revelation came from Johnny himself during a rare introspective moment with Mike Wallace in 1978. "When Amy touched my face, she wasn't feeling Johnny Carson, the entertainer. She couldn't see the suit, the stage, the cameras. She was just feeling a human face that happened to make sounds she enjoyed. In that moment, I realized I'd spent my entire adult life making sure nobody could really touch me, physically or emotionally. A 7-year-old blind girl taught me that being untouchable meant being unreachable, and being unreachable meant being alone." Dr. Joyce Brothers, analyzing the footage for her psychology column, wrote, "Carson's tears, when Amy found them on his face, represented the breakthrough moment in public masculinity. Here was America's most powerful entertainer, weeping while a child read his emotions through touch, showing men everywhere that physical vulnerability and emotional availability were not weaknesses, but the deepest form of strength." The Amy Patterson touch became standard protocol in special education worldwide within 5 years of the broadcast. The United Nations adopted the Carson-Patterson Protocol for dignitary visits to schools for the blind. requiring officials to kneel and allow children to see them through touch. By 1985, over 500 television shows globally had implemented sensory segments where blind audience members could experience performances through alternative means. The Tonight Show's Stage 1 in Burbank installed permanent Braille signage and tactile guides, becoming the first fully accessible television studio in history. A bronze plaque at child height reads in both print and Braille. On this spot, Amy Patterson taught Johnny Carson and America how to truly see. Amy Patterson herself became exactly what she'd promised, a teacher. Following her education funded by The Tonight Show, she developed revolutionary techniques for multisensory learning that transformed special education. Her doctoral thesis, Seeing Through Touch. The night television became human, became required reading and media studies programs. By age 30, she'd established 23 schools using her methods across America. Johnny attended every opening, always kneeling to let the children see him, always crying when they traced his laugh lines. Their relationship continued until Johnny's retirement, with Amy's appearances becoming The Tonight Show's most requested segments in its history. The Smithsonian acquired the complete footage and designated it a national treasure in 1990, alongside Amy's white cane from that night and Johnny's tear-stained handkerchief. The museum's accessibility wing features a recreation of The Tonight Show set, where blind visitors can experience exactly what Amy felt. Johnny's desk, his chair, even a sculpture of his face created from Amy's tactile memories. Over 3 million people have seen Johnny Carson through touch at this exhibit, making it the most visited accessibility display in museum history. Television historians mark April 14, 1976, as the night that transformed the medium from visual to human. Every major talk show host since has had their Amy moment, an instance of breaking format for human connection. David Letterman instituted Sensory Fridays, Oprah created her Touch of Truth segments, and even Saturday Night Live incorporated blind performers. The Emmy Awards created the Patterson-Carson Humanity Award for broadcasting that transcends traditional sensory limitations. The Amy Patterson moment revealed a fundamental truth about human perception. We are all blind to something, and we all need permission to reach out and truly feel each other's humanity. When Amy asked to touch Johnny's face, she exposed society's terror of genuine contact, our elaborate distances maintained through politeness, professionalism, and fear. Her small hands on Johnny's famous face demonstrated that celebrity, wealth, and power dissolve under innocent touch, that beneath every constructed persona lies skin that warms, eyes that crinkle, and tears that fall exactly the same way. 20 million Americans didn't just watch Johnny cry. They felt permission to acknowledge their own hunger for authentic connection. The spiritual dimension transcended religious boundaries entirely. The image of Johnny Carson on his knees while a blind child read his soul through her fingertips became modern scripture about humility and grace. Ministers, rabbis, and monks incorporated the story into teachings about seeing the divine in others, how Amy saw what sighted people missed, because she looked with her hands and heart instead of making assumptions based on appearance. The moment asked fundamental questions. What are we blind to? Who have we failed to truly see? How many faces have we looked at without ever really touching the humanity beneath? The encounter exposed our collective disability, not Amy's blindness, but our inability to truly perceive each other beyond surfaces. Amy's fingers on Johnny's tears revealed that we all navigate through life partially blind, using incomplete senses to understand incomplete pictures of each other. Her courage to ask for what she needed, to see through touch, challenged every viewer to consider what they needed to ask for, what barriers they needed to cross, whose face they needed to really feel, to understand. Perhaps most profoundly, Amy's innocent request unveiled the poverty of sight-dependent connection. She couldn't see Johnny's expensive suit, his perfect hair, his television makeup. She could only feel his authentic emotional response to being truly seen. Her observation that "your face gets warm when you're funny" revealed more truth about Johnny Carson than 1,000 interviews ever had. In teaching Johnny what brave looked like, Amy taught America that true vision requires closing our eyes and opening everything else.